Welcome to the European Showcase Show on Import-Export TV. Every month I receive guests to talk about European Union, Australia and international trade. For this new episode, my first guest is partner International Trade and Custom at BDO, which is one of the world's leading audit and accounting organization. He's also the new head of international policy at the Professionals in International Trade, which is a membership-based organization who represents and supports the trade and investment activities of overseas companies in the Australian and New Zealand markets. Bill Cole, good morning.
Good morning, Nathaniel.
Thanks for being with us this morning. My first question, would you like to tell us a bit more about your activities? Obviously, you're a trade expert, but what would you like to tell us and share with us about your activities within these two organizations?
Nathaniel, I think it's true to say that it's been a journey that has really moved with markets and developments in cross-border arrangements. And what I mean by that is that when I began my career, there was a lot of focus on things like customs duty, etc. And as trade has become more sophisticated and international links more complex, the needs of industry in terms of informed consulting has also moved. My practice now is very, very much involved in all of the elements of international trade, the supply chain elements, the regulatory elements, the ability of businesses to contract effectively between countries in terms of their legal arrangements. So as trade and trade agreements have become more sophisticated and more far-reaching, so too is the consulting opportunities, and it has been a growth and education for me.
Bill, you've just mentioned a free trade agreement, and obviously Australia and the European Union have been formally engaged in a free trade agreement, in a FTA since 18 June 2018, with now 10 negotiating rounds held to date. What would you consider yourself as the main challenges in this free trade agreement between European Union and Australia?
Nathaniel, there's two levels of difficulty in the arrangements being hammered out between the EU and Australia. The first level takes us back 20 and 30 years to the typical concerns around trade in agricultural goods, reserved areas in the economy. These are things that are very, very old school, and it surprises and disappoints me that we still in the 21st century are arguing about who gets the right to sell cheese into another market. I would have hoped that we've moved on from that, but it remains a chronic problem, of course, that nation states or groupings of nations, as the EU is, seek to deal with trade in terms of political formations in their own jurisdictions. And farming is a key one, obviously. The other level of difficulty takes us right to the very edge of developments in economies and technologies, and that relates to discussions around the appropriate standards for digitalisation, the transfer of information in between economies, security of that information, and the rights and responsibilities that go with it. So we have this bookend effect in the European and to some extent the UK agreements, where we have the highly sophisticated end of the economy being discussed and a certain asymmetry between countries coming forward as to whose standards should be adopted and how those interactions at that level will be formalised. So it's a bizarre circumstance.
Bill, you mentioned agriculture in the talk. As you know, and maybe as our viewers of European Showcase Show and Import-Export TV know, the European agriculture, for example, is a lot subsidized. You know, like agriculture farmers receive a lot of subsidies, which can cause a couple of issues in Europe. Do you think the fact that some entire sectors are inundated by subsidies, does it bring an additional difficulty when you have to make and create a free trade agreement with another entity?
It remains a perennial problem, and the recent 12 to 18 months of COVID virus, with all the themes of reshoring, national security and self-sufficiency coming to the fore, these issues have underlined nation states' desires to not be vulnerable to supply chain failures in trade, in terms of being able to feed their people, in terms of being able to obtain vaccines, and so it goes and so it goes. The degree of governmental incentives in most countries to foster a lot of industries that exist elsewhere in the world in order to have that security has been quite remarkable. And it sets up a parallel, if you like, between the logic of growth through trade versus accepted, probably inefficient, probably more expensive production locally in order to secure supplies on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'd like to, Bill, we maybe take one step backward. And if we have a look at the big picture, we know that Australia ranked as the 19th largest trading goods partner of the EU, while the EU represented Australia's third largest trading partner in 2020 after China and Japan. My question is, how do we trade, how do we organize international trade when the relationship and I would say the dependency in terms of trade is so different? 19th versus third. Is there something that has been that has to be solved, or is it okay to have such an unbalanced, I would say, dependency?
The composition of trade with the EU is heavily skewed towards high value manufacturing products. So yes, there are a lot of interest, of course, in European wines and foods and everything else, but the big money that Australia pays out and creates a trade imbalance, a significant one, of something like I think 150% from my last review of the figures, is that machinery and cars, productive machinery and cars and similar high-tech devices form a significant portion of the trade with the EU. As a result, the situation has resulted in tariffs being levied on these goods, where, if you like, plastic from China, for instance, is zero rated. So, you know, there are all kinds of arguments around, well, surely we should distinguish between the end use of these items, but that's another story. The fact is that Australia offers in return lower value-added items, and volume aside, that's resulted in a significant trade imbalance. What in the agreement will even those figures up? I'm not sure that it will. What could change the dial is the ability of EU firms to easily foreign direct invest in Australia and use Australia as a base for both manufacturing in this country, but also servicing Asia Pacific markets more effectively from the Australian base. And these issues, I suppose, are how I see the true benefits of the agreement, not in existing trading goods, but really about the, if you like, the digital economy and the ability to have greater foreign direct investment.
EU and Australia are like-minded partners, and both entities trade and will trade, obviously, more and more together. If we focus on the supply chain control and reporting, which is obviously of interest for the European Showcase Show and Import-Export TV, what would be the trends in terms of supply chain control and reporting from both players, EU and Australia?
In a number of areas that are related to trade, but in traditional terms peripheral, such as security, compliance, and related matters. The EU has progressively instituted a range of ideas around the traceability of goods, their provenance, their handling, the means of movement, and similar kinds of controls and reporting requirements that seek to address a range of concerns in the EU market. And these stem from everything from modern slavery concepts to sanctioned goods, to fraudulent trade, etc., etc. So all of these, there's a coming together, there's a crystallization of these ideas that are resulting in what regulators consider to be a small range of compliance activities. Now, of course, Australia is not by any means unfamiliar with these approaches, but what is new in the Australian sphere in terms of these things is the idea of them being omnipresent in the sense that they are required as a matter of course rather than as something an importer or an exporter or a supply chain chooses to do. So the mandatory nature of supply chain controls will certainly transform trade. I think the application of artificial intelligence in order to achieve compliance in these areas can also offer a range of efficiencies and cost mitigation. So strangely enough, this increased requirement around compliance, I think, will promote an equal, an opposite and hopefully equal reduction in costs due to it being driven by sophisticated approaches.
Okay, so very tangible consequences in terms of business and economy.
As a best case scenario, Nathaniel.
Okay, yeah, obviously. Bill, I like to ask my guests to conclude the show a question around future and prediction. Obviously, we can't trade in crystal balls, but as an international trade expert, what are your predictions regarding trade and international trade between EU and Australia in the next coming years? And is the future bright, Bill?
I think it's inevitable that trade will again struggle to reach pre-GFC levels. It took a decade for value and volume of trade to reach the same levels after the GFC. I think we did that just before COVID hit. So overall trade, I think, has been depressed. It will recover. The type of trade, I think, though, is probably the real question. And I think it's true to say that the onshoring policies of many governments through the COVID era will result in a change in the composition of trade. There'll be, I think, a polarisation of trade between raw materials and high level value-added items. It'll be the middle that will be affected negatively by it. In terms of the agreements themselves, I think the trend is that increasingly these trade agreements are becoming more sophisticated, and they actually represent departures from pure trade concepts. There's definitely trends emerging that I suppose ultimately integrate economies progressively rather than just deal with the movement of goods. So I think there'll be interesting collisions of national interest and international interest in these agreements growing as agreements progress.
Bill, you're a partner in international trade and customs at BDO. You're the new head of policy of international policy. At the Professionals in International Trade. You're an international trade expert. Thanks a lot for having shared your expertise with us and Import Export TV this morning.
It's my pleasure, Nathaniel.
Stay tuned. After the break, I will receive my second guest. for the European Showcase Show on Import-Export TV.
Think about the clothes you're wearing, the food you're eating, or even the furniture in your home. There is a story and history associated with every product you've ever bought. Unfortunately, sometimes the workers who make your products are subjected to terrible working conditions, are not treated fairly, or the manufacturing process is harmful to the environment. There are many forms of modern slavery and damaging production methods, but it's up to us, industry leaders and the consumers themselves, to take a stand so that we can contribute to a healthier planet and to changing the lives of everyone involved across the global supply chains for the better. Ethical Trade Alliance enables buyers to make informed choices on all of the products they purchase.
Welcome back to the European Showcase Show on Import-Export TV, your show about Europe, Australia and international trade. My second guest is as comfortable with the hard skills she is with the soft skills. Welcome, good morning, Pascale Toussat.
Good morning, Natanael.
Could you introduce a bit yourself first?
Yes, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here today. So my name is Pascale Toussat. I've been living in Australia for 30 years, mainly in Melbourne, so I call myself a FrAussie. I decided that that was something, catchy for people to get to know me a little bit better. I've been working in human resources for 20 years, and mainly working for French companies. So I think the connection of the topic today is quite relevant, because I think, when you're French, and I really understand that being French working for a French company is crucial. And reflecting on how I got my visa back in 1991, it was interesting to see, even at the time, it was quite difficult to secure a visa. It was not so much on the skill I had, but actually because I was French. So the company was looking for someone French and not someone who could speak French. So I think, the value of being French in an organization is crucial. And I had a bit of a change in career after my 20 years in working for a French company. After a bit of a reshuffle in the business model, my role moved to Singapore. So we decided to depart with the organization, and I've now created my own little business.
Great, and you were mentioning the fact you have been recruited at the time because you were French and working for a French company. And I always say to clients or stakeholders that I think reputation today, and even more than ever, is the main asset of a company or the main asset of someone. Maybe we'll go back to this notion, but you say you transition from this big corporate French and international company to a new business. What's the core of your new business? What's the name first of your new business, and what's the core of your new business?
So keeping in the French spirit, I call my business HR A La Carte. Sounds a little bit French, but also a bit English as well. So
what does it mean, HR A La Carte?
Well, I think there's two main offerings. The first one is to offer flexible HR services for small to business companies who don't have the means or resources to have someone internally all the time. I think that in the last few years, the labor law in Australia has moved towards more being employee-centric than employer-centric. So my role in the services I offer is to minimize the risks for company, because if you don't have the right policies or procedures in place, it could be very risky and costly for the organization. The second one is more in line with being French. I call the cross-cultural mentoring. I'm trying to help people coming from overseas or Australian leaders working for French companies in Australia to grasp the cultural gap. During my 20 years working mainly for French companies, I've often witnessed that not having that business acumen could be quite a high risk for the organization and also for the new people coming to Australia.
It's interesting because you mentioned a process before, and our previous guest, Bill Cole from BOD and the professionals in international trade, mentioned also all this process and trackability when there's a free trade agreement, when there's a trade between organizations, and I guess it's also the same aspect that has to be dealt when it comes to human, the trackability, in fact,
Totally.
of the person you may come from abroad to Australia. During Pascale, a previous discussion we had, you were mentioning to me the intercultural gaps between French and European people when they come and when they work in Australia. Could you tell me a bit more about these intercultural and maybe interpersonal gaps between European people, workers, employees, employers, and Australian workers and employers?
Yeah, certainly. And I think maybe before we go into those differences, I should give a bit of numbers to set the context.
Sure.
And I grabbed a few numbers for you to give the idea of the presence of foreign companies in Australia. So there's around 500 French companies, subsidiaries of French companies in Australia, implanted in 5 out of the 6 states, and they employ about 17,000 people, which is quite a large number. France is also the 10th investor in Australia, which is not a bad position to be in. And France is the 26th client and 37th supplier to Australia, as opposed to Australia being the 37th client and 52nd supplier to France. So the gap between the two countries and the money invested is quite large. So going back to the differences, I was thinking, naturally that without knowing what I was doing working for HR French companies, I was actually already in the role of mentoring French expatriates when they were coming to Australia. So because my experience is more in French companies, maybe I stick with the difference between French and Australian. The first one is probably communication. In Australia, communication tends to be more direct. People will be more honest and open in the way they talk. They can openly disagree with you, which for French people sometimes is not well received. It doesn't mean they are rude, but they tend to get to the point very quickly. Instead of French people, sometimes they have a long discussion. So this is one big difference in terms of communication. The second one is probably a more collaborative working environment. In a meeting, it's quite normal for everyone around the table to be asked for their opinion. So the decision-making process will be using more collaborative avenues by which people and employees feel involved in a decision-making process. Also, differences I've noticed is using a leverage of power in a negotiating situation is very not well perceived in Australia. And I think that's something that in a business acumen, people should be aware of. This is something we refer to as the tall poppy syndrome. As you know, Natanael, this is something very common in Australia, by which using a leverage of power or personal achievement amongst their peers is quickly cut down. Also, something different is, and unique to Australia, and I think you also refer to that, Nathan, is what we call the mateship. Natanael, we refer to friends or colleagues as mates, which is quite unique to Australia. And the sense is, relationship is based more on camaraderie rather than the chain of command, and it's quite unique for someone coming from overseas to see that the barrier being sort of broken down, because we have more a level of relationship which is based on friendship rather than I'm the boss and I tell you what to do. And maybe the last one, which is quite I was quite not aware of this when I looked at the differences, is actually working hours. Australia is at the bottom third of the OECD countries when it comes to working long hours. I think a report showed that 20% of male and 7% of women were working more than 50 hours a week, which is quite a large number when you look at the current practices. So what that means for organization is that they want to be able to offer some flexible working arrangement for their employees, more friendly, family-friendly environment. So it changes a little bit the way that working long hours doesn't mean that you work hard, but companies need to be aware of that.
About this question of what we call in Australia work-life balance, which is the ability to have at the same time a career and a family life, do you think with the COVID that the whole world experimented, and above all Europe when it was quite hard, and that's still not the end, do you think also Europe will reach more a work-life balance type of life because people just realize that you can work from home remotely? Or do you think it's something that will disappear, unfortunately, or fortunately, when the COVID will disappear?
That's a very good question, and depending on which side of the fence you sit, you could say it's lucky or unlucky. For me, there's no questions that COVID has changed the business model when it comes to working environment. People have got a taste of being able to work from home. They enjoyed it, and I think currently people don't want to come back to work. For organizations, the struggle they have is now to bring people back to the organization. So I believe that organizations will have to review their work practices, their business model in terms of what do we want for our employees. If organizations don't listen to what workers want, they will fail. And what that means in the long term, that means that they will have big issue in terms of attracting and also retaining staff. And I believe that it's a global situation. It's not, Australia, Europe, Asia, or whatever. And the world will have to follow because our employers are demanding that we work from home, and they prove to us that it could do it quite effectively, actually.
You mentioned these intercultural gaps, these differences and I summarize in communication, in the collaborative aspect of the work, and in the work-life balance. Now the question that all our viewers on the European Showcase Show and Export TV have is, how do we lower these gaps? What are the solutions? So first, maybe, do we have to lower these gaps, or do we have to keep, I would say, these differences between European companies' mentality and Australian? And if we have to lower, how do we do to lower these gaps, Pascale?
Yep. I think, the diversity of culture in the world is too precious to try to mold everyone in one model. So my view will be, if we were to keep it, and my view would be we should keep them because they are so rich in, learning and meeting different people. So my view will be, if you come to a different country, you should try to understand the gaps. And the way to do that is basically to have people like myself who offer some training in cross-cultural mentoring to get a flavor of, yes, we're doing business, but there will be some situation by which the new person might not feel comfortable. And it's not a training, it's more mentoring, because I know something that you don't know that you should know. So it's a bit tricky when it comes to mentoring people, because if they don't know the gap, they don't know there's something to learn.
But, you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly why. So I always struggle to say to people, don't worry, you don't know what you don't know, but I'm going to tell you what you don't know. But I think mentoring is the best way from someone like myself who've seen it, experienced it, lived it, and now is quite willingly wanted to pass that to people coming to Australia.
Yeah, Pascale, and as we saw also with our first guest today, the fact there's a free trade agreement between European Union and Australia creates kind of a virtuous circle where obviously it will have positive effect and benefits for the relationship and the work relationship between newcomers from EU, for example, and Australian companies. Pascale, I like to ask my guests to conclude the show a question about a prediction, a question about the future. How do you see the future of collaboration between EU and Australia companies? Do you think there will be major trends in the next coming years?
Totally. I fully. I think that there's no doubt that Europe will be more coming to Australia. I mean, if we look at the situation of Australia is one of the most developed countries in the world. I mean, this is due to 20th year of growth and quite a thriving economy. And there's a number that shows that Australia ranked 19 out of 190 for ease of those business in 2019. So for people to come to Australia, there's a room for them to be able to do some work. And also there's an important number that says that the predictable growth of Australia is 23.7% in the next 15th year. That means that for European countries, there will be plenty of opportunities to develop business. Australia wants to grow in infrastructure, agrotech, green energy, and obviously tourism, post-COVID when the borders will open again. So this will also be facilitated, as you rightly said, by Australia wanting to sign some free trade agreement in Australia, in Europe, sorry. So there will be definitely avenues for European business to come and work in Australia. So it's a bright future for any European business listening to that show today, because Australia is quite welcoming, and I know there's some free trade agreement, you might have mentioned that's quite close to being finalized. So all the ducks are aligned for that to happen.
Pascale Toussat, you're a human resource expert, the founder of HR A La Carte.
A La Carte, yes.
So thanks a lot for having shared your expertise and your knowledge about HR and intercultural gaps, but also strength between EU and Australia. Thanks a lot, Pascale.
Thank you for having me, and pleasure to be here. Thank you, Natanael.
It was a pleasure to host the European Showcase show on Import-Export TV today. As usual, we had wonderful guests talking about EU, Australia, and the relationship between the two entities. And I'll see you very soon for a new episode of the European Showcase show on Import-Export TV.
Think about the clothes you're wearing, the food you're eating, or even the furniture in your home. There is a story and history associated with every product you've ever bought. Unfortunately, sometimes the workers who make your products are subjected to terrible working conditions, are not treated fairly, or the manufacturing process is harmful to the environment. There are many forms of modern slavery and damaging production methods, but it's up to us, industry leaders and the consumers themselves, to take a stand so that we can contribute to a healthier planet and to changing the lives of everyone involved across the global supply chains for the better. Ethical Trade Alliance enables buyers to make informed choices on all of the products they purchase.